I'm involved with ASA from the beginning. I came to Austin back in the early 1980s to work at the Capitol and work on political campaigns. When HIV and AIDS came along, I was still just barely out of the closet to friends and family, certainly not out at the Capitol. And I was watching this disease, hearing about it as I went to Waterloo Counseling Center as a client in my coming out process in the early 80s. And there was this disease out there, and they called it gay-related immunodeficiency virus. It's sort of a concern to all of us. And then some people in Austin came down with the disease. Somebody told me about this AIDS project that was starting up, and that some people from San Francisco from the Shanti Project were going to come to Austin and do a training. And so we met on a Saturday for 5 or 6 hours to do an intensive training about how you deal with somebody who has just found out that they're going to die, and to be their buddy. And it was called the Buddy Project. And I was one of the very first buddies here in Austin. I did 3 of those guys in a row, none of which lived more than 6 months. And that sort of pulled me into this tragedy that was unfolding around all of us. So the agency itself was just a project of the Waterloo Counseling Center. First year or so, it was really just that, just helping people die in a dignified way. But it kept growing. Exponentially it grew. And the project, the AIDS project of the Waterloo Counseling Center, within a matter of time was bigger than the counseling center. I knew that if we were going to get funding from public agencies, the city, the county, the state, the federal funds, that in that time it was going to be very difficult to get those funds if we were a gay and lesbian agency. So it was imperative in my mind that the agency be its standalone project. And so a group of us went out and incorporated a new agency, and that's when AIDS Services of Austin was born.
Well, my early memories were hearing about AIDS in 1983. There was more news coming out of the East Coast and the West Coast, but not really anything happening in Austin. I believe a lot of us felt that this was a disease that was going to affect the whole country, and that certainly our city would be affected. But then towards the end of '83, something happened and a group of us came together, and I wanted to be part of it. So the only thing we could think of to do at that point was to put together an educational effort and an awareness week.
And that's how I got involved, because a guy that I was interested in asked me to help address and lick envelopes for a fundraiser. I mean, this was so grassroots in the beginning. The treasurer at the time, which meant he had the checkbook, was going on a trip. So Paul needed somebody else to write checks while the treasurer was gone on this trip. And Stanton, the guy, said, Lee can do that. So I became the treasurer of the Austin AIDS Project, and then they kind of quickly learned that I could lead a meeting. Couldn't always contribute a lot else, but I could lead a meeting. So that's how I ended up being. I was the first board chair and treasurer.
I met with Glenn
Right.
and Lee, who were on the board at Trudy's Restaurant.
That's a meeting that I have a vivid memory of as well, because at one point, just very professionally and nicely, you kind of took over. And there was no question as to who needed to be the first executive director.
People who got an AIDS diagnosis back then died an average of about 11 months later. We had case managers who would lose 1, 2, 3, 5 clients a month. We saw the parents, the lovers, the partners, the children, of these individuals. And then we saw clients who were totally alone, had been abandoned by everyone.
Well, I came on board as executive director in 1997, and the epidemic was at a very different point. But it seemed like that for the first time in the epidemic, the science and the medicine were beginning to mesh in a way that they understood how the virus was working in the human body. Literally, there were clients who you weren't sure you were going to see next week. And they would get on the combination therapy and they would rebound. One of the things that we recognized that the agency was going to need to do is to keep that more acute emergency response, but also develop the longer term sustainable, more of a disease management type model, because the hope was that's where the disease was going to move.